The wind carried dust and secrets across the empty land, curling through the grass and whispering against the walls of a small cabin standing alone at the edge of the valley. The sun was slipping behind the far hills, painting the world in amber and rust. The only sound was the slow creak of the porch boards as a woman stood by the door watching the horizon. Her dress was worn at the seams, her hands rough from long days of work, and her eyes held the kind of tiredness that came not just from labor but from fear. Somewhere behind her, a small voice stirred, a child asking if they could light the lamp yet. She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed on the darkening ridge, where a single rider was coming down slow. She knew who it was, long before the horse stopped by the fence. Word had traveled fast through the town, faster than the wind that carried it, that the Apache had been seen again near the river. Some said he was hunting, others said he was looking for something he'd lost, but the woman knew better. He wasn't hunting for food or shelter. He was looking for her. She had met him once, years ago, when the world was different and her heart still had room for trust. It was in a storm, the kind that drowned the sky and soaked the earth until the road disappeared. He had been wounded then, half conscious, and leaning against a tree not far from where her husband had fallen in the war. She had taken him in out of mercy, not love, not at first. She had cleaned his wounds, shared her bread, and sat by the fire while he spoke little, but watched her with eyes that held both pain and something she couldn't name. When he left, he said nothing, just looked back once before vanishing into the wild. She hadn't seen him since. Until now, the child called again, asking if it was safe to light the lamp. She turned quickly, whispered that it was, and watched as the small flame flickered to life. The soft glow filled the room, throwing gentle shadows on the walls. The warmth of it made the home look peaceful, but she felt none of that peace inside her. Every heartbeat seemed to echo too loud, too fast. The horse outside shifted its weight, the saddle creaking faintly. The sound was enough to make her step back from the door, pressing her hand against her chest. The man dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the dry soil. He was tall, with long black hair tied behind his neck, and a face cut by both time and loneliness. His eyes were the same, sharp, steady, unreadable. He carried no weapon in his hands, though she knew he didn't need one to make her afraid. There was a stillness about him that unsettled her more than anger ever could. "Please, don't come in," she said softly, her voice trembling as she reached for the latch. Her words carried through the night, carried by the fear she couldn't hide. He stopped, standing just a few steps away from the porch. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them felt heavier than words could bear. Behind her, the child's voice whispered, asking who it was. She didn't answer. The Apache looked at the house, then at her, his face unreadable beneath the dim light. "You remember me?" he said quietly. It wasn't a question. She nodded, her fingers tightening on the latch. "I do, and I remember what came after." His expression shifted, just barely. "You saved my life. I did what anyone would have done." "Not anyone," he said. His voice was calm, but carried something rough under it, something wounded. "You took me in when your own people would have left me to die." "That was a long time ago," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You should leave. There's nothing here for you." He looked toward the lamplit window, where the shadow of the child flickered faintly across the curtain. "You have someone now," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "My son?" He nodded, eyes lowering for a moment before lifting again. "He's the reason you live out here alone." She didn't answer. The truth was complicated. The town had turned its back on her after her husband died, whispers spreading faster than mercy ever could. A widow who took in an Apache, even for one night, became a woman to be avoided. She had come here to build a quiet life, far from eyes that judged, far from mouths that lied. But the past had a way of following, no matter how far she ran. The wind blew harder. Pushing against the door, carrying the scent of rain and the faint smoke of campfires somewhere beyond the hills, he stepped closer, just enough that she could see the faint scars along his jaw. "You think I came here to hurt you?" he asked softly. "I don't know why you came," she said. "But you shouldn't be here." He looked away toward the valley. "Your people still hate mine," he said. "They burned our camps, took our land, called us wild because we wouldn't kneel. You know that." "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned back to her. "And yet you helped me." Her eyes met his, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The truth pressed heavy inside her chest. She had helped him not out of duty, but because she had seen something human in him that no one else cared to see. But now, years later, that same humanity frightened her. "You should go," she said finally. "Before anyone sees you here who had come this far?" he asked quietly. "You've built a home where no one dares to come." She wanted to say he was wrong, that someone might ride up the path any minute, but they both knew that wasn't true. The world had forgotten this corner of land, just as it had forgotten the people who once called it home. He took another step, and she felt her breath catch. "Don't," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "Please don't come in." He stopped again, his shadow falling across the threshold. The child's laughter rang faintly from inside, unaware of the storm building outside the door. His eyes softened for a moment as he looked past her. "You've made something good here," he said. She didn't answer. Her heart was racing, torn between fear and a strange ache she couldn't name. "I didn't come for revenge," he said after a long pause. "I came because I had nowhere else left to go." The words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time, she saw the weariness in his face, the loneliness that clung to him like dust. He wasn't the threat she'd built up in her mind. He was a man who had lost everything: his people, his land, and whatever peace he might have once known. She wanted to speak, to tell him to stay or to go. She didn't know which. But before she could, a distant sound broke through the quiet: a horse. Fast and heavy, coming from the direction of town. The color drained from her face. He turned his head, listening, his expression hardening. "They're coming," she whispered. "You have to go now." He looked back at her, his eyes dark in the fading light. "If I leave now, they'll kill me before sunrise." "Then hide," she said desperately. "Please, I'll find a way." The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the hills like thunder. She turned toward the sound, fear rising in her chest. When she looked back, the Apache was gone from the porch, swallowed by the shadows beyond the cabin. She closed the door quickly, locking it, her hands shaking. The child looked up from the floor, asking what was wrong. She forced a smile, saying it was nothing, just the wind again. But outside, the riders drew closer, and in the darkness, beyond the fence, two eyes watched from the brush, waiting. The lamp flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the room. The air felt too still, too thick. Somewhere out there, between the approaching danger and the silence that followed, something was about to break. And when it did, neither the woman nor the lonely Apache would ever be the same again. The sound of hooves grew louder until it felt like the earth itself was trembling beneath the small cabin. The woman held her breath, standing in the middle of the room, listening. Her heart beat so fast it almost drowned out the noise outside. She looked toward the window where the thin curtain fluttered slightly in the wind. Beyond it, a lantern's light appeared, first one, then two, swinging in rhythm with the rider's approach. The glow danced across the rough wood of the walls, flickering like a warning. Her son clutched the hem of her dress, asking what was happening, but she didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the window, her ears tuned to every sound. She knew who those riders might beam in from town, or worse, the ones who had been hunting the Apache since the skirmish near the river weeks ago. She'd heard the talk at the trading post, how they wanted his head, how they blamed him for what they didn't understand. They were angry, proud, and cruel enough to shoot first and ask questions later. She moved quickly, pulling the child toward the small back room. "Stay here," she whispered. "No matter what happens, don't make a sound." She closed the door softly and turned back toward the front of the house. Three men dismounted, their shapes moving against the pale moonlight. They tied their horses and began walking toward the porch. She recognized one of them, the sheriff. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of his face, but she knew that voice anywhere. "Evening, ma'am," he called out. "Mind if we come in for a word?" She froze, unsure what to do. If she refused, they might grow suspicious. If she agreed, they'd see the tracks outside. The prints that led toward the back of the property where the Apache had slipped away. I wasn't expecting company this late, she said. Her voice steady, though her chest felt tight. The sheriff stepped onto the porch, boots scraping the wood. Didn't mean to startle you. We're just looking for someone. Thought you might have seen him, who? An Apache, he said plainly. Tall, dark hair, rides a black horse. Word is, he's been seen near this side of the valley. Dangerous man, or so folks say. Her stomach twisted at the lie in his tone. The sheriff didn't care if the Apache was dangerous. He just wanted the bounty that came with catching him. I haven't seen anyone, she said softly. Just me and my boy out here. The sheriff studied her face for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. Mind if we look around? Just to be sure? Her throat went dry. There's nothing here but the dust and the wind. One of the men behind him chuckled, the sound sharp. That's what the widow said last time we checked her place. Turned out she had 2 drifters hiding in the barn. The sheriff raised a hand, silencing him, then looked back at her. We'll make it quick. Before she could speak, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The smell of the desert followed him, dust, sweat, and gunpowder. She moved aside, her pulse hammering in her ears. The other 2 men entered as well, their eyes scanning the room like wolves scenting prey. The sheriff walked slowly toward the table. Glancing at the lamp, the fire, the single plate that still sat near the stove. You've been eating late, he said casually. She forced a smile. My boy couldn't sleep. One of the men kicked at a chair, looking toward the back door. You sure you're alone? Yes, she said firmly. The sheriff stopped near the window, looking out toward the barn. Mind if we check out back? She hesitated, and that hesitation betrayed her more than any words could. The sheriff turned his gaze back to her, slow and deliberate. You know something, don't you? Her fingers tightened around her apron. I told you, I haven't seen anyone. The sheriff's face softened slightly, but his eyes didn't. You've always been kind-hearted, he said. That's a good thing most days. But it can get you hurt if you show mercy to the wrong man. Her breath caught. I don't know what you mean. He leaned closer. If you see him, you'll tell us, won't you? She nodded quickly, her voice barely a whisper. Of course. The sheriff studied her one last time, then motioned for his men. Come on, let's move. He can't have gone far. They left as suddenly as they came, boots thudding against the porch as they mounted their horses. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, swallowed by the wind. Only then did she let herself breathe again. She walked to the door and looked out. The moonlight spilled across the field, silvering the grass. Everything seemed calm again, but she knew it wasn't over. She turned toward the back of the house and stepped outside quietly, her heart still racing. The night air was cool and heavy. She moved through the shadows, her feet silent on the packed earth. Behind the barn, she saw movement, a faint shift in the dark. He was there, half hidden behind a stack of hay, watching her. His face was tense, his hand resting near the knife at his belt. They're gone, she whispered. For now. He didn't move at first, then slowly stepped into the light. They'll come back, I know. He looked at her with something between gratitude and guilt. You shouldn't have lied for me. She met his gaze. If I hadn't, they would have killed you right there. He was quiet for a moment. You risked your life. I did what I thought was right. He nodded slowly, looking toward the horizon. Your people would call that foolish. Maybe, she said softly, but it's still what makes us human. The words hung between them, quiet and heavy. He looked down, the faintest trace of something pain. Maybe longing flickering in his eyes. You helped me once before, he said finally, and now again. Why? She hesitated, searching for an answer that didn't sound like a confession. Because I know what it means to be alone, he didn't reply. But the look he gave her said more than words could. From the barn, the horses shifted restlessly, sensing the tension that neither of them could break. The woman folded her arms, glancing toward the hills. You can't stay here long. They'll search this place again. Can move before dawn, he said. But I need water and food for the horse, she nodded. I'll get it. Inside, she filled a small sack with bread, jerky, and a flask of water. Her hands moved quickly, but her mind raced. She could feel the pull of two worlds, the safety she wanted for her son, and the quiet mercy she couldn't stop giving to this man. When she returned, he was tightening the saddle strap. His horse shifted under the moonlight, dark and strong. He looked up when she approached, taking the sack from her without a word. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. For a moment, they stood there, the air thick with unspoken things. Then he said, "If I'm caught, they'll blame you. You know that?" "I'll manage," she said. He paused, studying her face as if trying to memorize it. "You remind me of someone," he said. "A woman from my tribe. She believed kindness could heal what hate destroyed." "Did it?" she asked softly. He looked away. "No. But she never stopped trying." She wanted to say something more, but before she could, the wind shifted. Carrying a faint echo, the sound of riders again, far off but coming closer. His head snapped toward the sound, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife. "They're returning," she whispered. He mounted his horse quickly. "Stay inside. Don't let them see you." She reached out almost without thinking and caught his arm. "Wait, where will you go?" He met her eyes. "North. Into the hills, they'll track you." "I've lived my whole life being hunted," he said. "They'll have to try harder." He turned the horse, ready to ride into the darkness, but for a heartbeat he lingered. "If I don't make it," he said quietly, "tell your boy not all Apaches were cruel." Before she could answer, he kicked the reins and the horse leaped forward. Vanishing into the night, she stood there staring after him, her heart aching in a way she couldn't explain. The hoofbeats faded into the wind, leaving only the rustle of the dry grass and the distant cry of an owl. When she turned back toward the cabin, the lamp still glowed faintly through the window. Her son would be waiting, scared and sleepless, asking questions she didn't know how to answer. She walked slowly to the door, her mind heavy with what had just happened. She knew this wasn't the end. The riders would come again, and when they did, the truth she was hiding might be the one thing that could destroy them all. As she closed the door and leaned against it, she could still hear the faint rhythm of hooves somewhere out there in the darkness. Carrying both danger and something she didn't want to name - hope, morning came pale and quiet. The kind of morning where the air held its breath before the sun broke free of the hills. The woman was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of cold coffee she hadn't touched. Her son was still asleep, curled up beneath a blanket that had seen too many winters. She should have felt relief that the night had passed without another visit. But her chest was tight with something else in unease that wouldn't fade. Every shadow outside felt like a threat. Every sound carried the weight of what she was hiding. The Apache was gone, but his presence lingered like the echo of a promise she didn't understand. She had spent the night listening for hoofbeats, half hoping he would make it safely through the hills, half fearing the men from town had already found his trail. When dawn came and the horizon stayed quiet, she should have been at peace. But instead, she found herself wondering why he had come to her door in the first place. As the morning light crept across the room, she thought about the sheriff. He had been different, once kind, fair, even gentle in his way. But something had hardened in him after the raids along the river. The loss of men under his watch had changed him, turned justice into vengeance. He wanted to prove he could protect his people, even if that meant hunting down a man who might not have been guilty at all. She rose from the chair and stepped outside. The air was cool, the sky washed in soft gold. Her garden lay still, the leaves trembling in the light wind. She checked the soil, pulled a few weeds, trying to calm her hands. But her mind kept drifting back to the Apache's face, the calm strength in his eyes, the quiet sorrow beneath it. She had told herself he was a danger, a man hunted for good reason. Yet, every time she remembered his voice, it didn't sound like a man full of hate. It sounded like someone carrying the weight of a life he never asked for. She wondered if the sheriff knew that truth, or if he simply didn't care anymore. By the time her son woke, she'd already started the fire and placed a pan on the stove. The smell of frying bread filled the small house, covering the scent of fear that had settled there. The boy sat at the table, rubbing his eyes. "Mama," he said softly, Was that man last night bad? She froze for a moment, the question hitting deeper than she expected. Why do you ask that? You told him not to come in, the boy said. But you sounded scared for him too. She turned back to the stove, pretending to focus on the pan. Sometimes people aren't good or bad, she said finally. Sometimes they're just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The boy thought for a moment, then nodded, accepting her words in the simple way children did. Will he come back? She didn't answer. She didn't know later that day she went into town for supplies. The streets were busy with wagons and dust, the air filled with the sound of hammers, dogs, and gossip. As she walked toward the general store, she felt the weight of eyes following her. The sheriff's men were gathered outside the saloon, talking in low voices. She caught snippets of their words, tracks by the creek, fresh hoofprints, heading north. Her stomach turned. Inside the store, she tried to keep her composure. Old Mr. Hanley, the storekeeper, greeted her with a polite smile. "Morning, ma'am. You doing all right out there?" "As well as can be," she said, forcing a smile. He nodded, lowering his voice. "Word is the Apache's still around. Sheriff says he's closing in this time." She kept her eyes on the shelf of flour. "You think they'll catch him?" Hanley shrugged. "If they do, it won't be pretty. Folks want someone to blame for what happened down by the river?" "What did happen?" she asked quietly. "Ambush," he said. "Couple of wagons burned. Sheriff says it was the Apache, but some folks think it was drifters. Hard to say these days." She nodded, pretending not to care, but her hands shook as she paid. On the way out, she caught a glimpse of the sheriff standing by his horse, talking with a stranger. The man wore a brown coat and carried a rifle that looked too clean for travel. His eyes swept the street and stopped on her for a moment, unreadable. She turned quickly away, her heart thudding. When she reached the edge of town, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw the sheriff walking toward her, his hat low over his brow. "Morning, ma'am," he said in that easy tone of his. "Didn't get a chance to thank you last night for your patience." "It was nothing. You sure you didn't see anything?" he asked, his voice lighter now, but his eyes sharp. "I'm sure," she said. "It was just me and my boy." He studied her for a long moment. "You've got a kind heart," he said again, almost like a warning. Sometimes that can cloud a person's judgment. She forced herself to meet his gaze. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps a person human. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her standing in the dust that evening. As the sun sank behind the ridge, she returned home and found the barn door slightly ajar. Her pulse jumped. She stepped closer, her hand gripping the small knife she kept near the door. Pushing the door open, she saw him there, the Apache leaning against the stall. His horse drinking from the trough. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, her voice low. "They're closing in," he said simply. "The sheriff has men at the river and the pass. You can't stay here," she said, glancing toward the house. "They'll search again." "I know," he said, his tone calm. "But there's something you need to hear first." She frowned. "What could you possibly the attack they talk about?" he interrupted. "The wagons by the river." "It wasn't my people." She hesitated. "Then who?" He looked at her, his expression dark. "White men, wearing Apache paint? The kind that wanted the sheriff to have reason to hunt." Her mind spun. "You're saying they staged it?" "Yes, to clear our land once and for all."
Ow.
She shook her head slowly. "If that's true, you need proof." He nodded. "I have some. A man who saw it. But he's hiding near the canyon. I came to ask for help." Her throat went dry. "Help. I can't move him alone," he said. "He's hurt. If he dies, the truth dies with him." She looked toward the house. "I have a child. I can't be part of this." He stepped closer, not threatening, just steady. "You already are." She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. The moment she lied to the sheriff, she'd chosen her side. "Please," he said. "If you help me, it could stop the killing." She turned away, her hands trembling. "I don't know if I can." Before he could answer, the faint sound of a horse came from the road again. Both of them froze. He moved toward the shadows, while she stepped to the barn door, peering out. A single rider approached Chung, small-framed and carrying a rifle slung low. It was one of the sheriff's men. He stopped by the fence, scanning the land. "Anyone here?" he called out. The woman took a deep breath and walked forward, forcing a calm smile. "You're far from town," she said. "Sheriff sent me to check on you," he said. "Said you looked pale this morning." "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just tired." He looked past her, toward the barn. "Mind if I take a look around?" Her heart pounded so hard, she thought he might hear it. "It's late," she said. "There's nothing here but animals." He hesitated, then dismounted slowly. "Won't take a minute, Binder?" She could hear the Apache move quietly along the wall, out of sight. She stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance as the young deputy stepped closer. "You seem nervous, ma'am," he said, his hand resting on the rifle strap. She forced a laugh. "I'm not used to visitors after dark." He stopped, looking at her face for a long moment. "All right," he said finally, stepping back. "Sorry to bother you." As he turned to mount his horse, his gaze caught something, a faint set of footprints leading away from the barn. He squinted, lowering himself again. "Those tracks," he murmured. Before he could bend closer, the woman spoke sharply. "They're mine. I fed the horse earlier." He studied her again, uncertain, then nodded. "All right. Sheriff will be here in the morning to sweep the valley. You should stay inside." Watched as he rode off, the sound of hooves fading once more. When she turned back, the Apache was standing near the stall, his face unreadable. "You didn't have to cover for me again," he said. Double quotes, "Yes, I did," she said quietly. "Because if they catch you before you prove what really happened, the truth dies with you." He nodded once, eyes steady on hers. "Then we leave at dawn." She stared at him, torn between fear and conviction. The walls around her life, the quiet, lonely safety she'd built, were beginning to crack. She didn't know if she could walk away from everything she'd fought to protect. But she also knew that if she turned her back now, the lies of men like the sheriff would stand forever. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the distant cry of a coyote and the promise of another storm on the horizon. And in that uneasy silence, both knew that when morning came, their choices would decide more than just their own survival. The night before dawn was darker than usual, thick with the kind of silence that makes a person listen harder. The woman couldn't sleep. She sat by the small table, her hands wrapped around a cup of cooling tea, watching the faint glow of the fire dying in the hearth. Her son slept in the next room, safe for now, though she knew that safety was only borrowed time. Outside, the air felt alive, heavy with the promise of something coming, something she couldn't stop. She looked toward the barn where the Apache waited. He hadn't said much since their talk earlier, but his presence filled the night like a shadow she couldn't ignore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look in his face when he spoke of the man hiding in the canyon. The witness who could prove the truth behind the river attack. That truth was the only thing that could save his people, and maybe her, too. But the price of helping him meant leaving everything behind. The home she had built with her own hands, which the fragile piece she'd carved out of loneliness, it would all be gone the moment she rode with him. She looked at her son's door again, torn between duty and fear. He was all she had left. Before first light, she packed a small bag with food, a blanket, and a knife. The sky outside was just beginning to fade from black to gray when she stepped out to the barn. The Apache was already saddling his horse, moving with quiet precision. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "You're coming?" he asked softly. She nodded. "But I'm leaving my boy with Hanley in town. He'll be safe there," hesitated, then nodded. "You trust him?" "As much as I can trust anyone now." They worked in silence, the sounds of leather and metal filling the still air. As they prepared to leave, she glanced back toward the cabin. The thought of her son waking to an empty bed tore at her heart. But she knew if she stayed, they'd all lose more than comfort. The road toward town was long and narrow, bordered by dry fields and the ghostly outlines of trees stripped bare by wind. The sky had begun to lighten, streaked with faint pink. The woman rode ahead, the Apache close behind, his eyes scanning the horizon. When they reached the edge of town, she dismounted near Hanley's store. The old man was just opening the shutters when he saw her. "Up early," he said, squinting. "Something wrong?" "I need a favor," she said quickly. "My boy, can you keep him for a few days?" "I have to go north." Hanley frowned. "North? That's where the sheriff's men are headed. You sure that's wise?" She forced a small smile. "It's something I need to do." Hanley studied her face for a moment, then sighed. "All right. The boy can stay. But whatever's chasing you, don't bring it back here." "I won't," she said. She hugged her son tightly, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. He asked when she'd return, and she told him soon. He believed her. Children always did. When she turned away, she didn't look back. They rode out of town before the sun cleared the hills. The land grew rougher, the air cooler. The Apache guided the horses toward the narrow trails that wound through the rocks. As they climbed higher, the view opened miles of dry valleys, stretching like scars beneath the morning light. For hours they rode in silence. Occasionally he pointed out signs on the ground-broken branches, faint tracks. "They're close," he said quietly. "The sheriff's men are ahead, maybe half a day." Her pulse quickened. "Then we'll have to go around. There's no time," he said. "If they reach the canyon first, the witness dies." By midday the sun burned overhead, and the air shimmered with heat. They stopped by a small stream to rest the horses. She knelt to splash water on her face, the coolness cutting through the exhaustion. When she looked up, she saw the Apache watching her, his expression distant. "You could have stayed," he said quietly. "No one would have blamed you. I'd have blamed myself," she said. He nodded slowly. "You're braver than most who carry guns." "Bravery's just fear with no place to go," she said, half smiling. He didn't smile back, but his eyes softened. "You remind me of the women from my tribe. Strong enough to build life from dust." She wanted to ask about his people, his family, but something in his voice stopped her. Whatever story he carried, it was carved too deep to share now. They rode again, the shadows growing long behind them. The sky had begun to turn gold when they spotted the first sign of danger, a column of smoke rising faintly in the distance. The Apache pulled his horse to a stop, scanning the horizon. "That's the canyon," he said. "But that's smoke. They've already found it." Her stomach tightened. "Then we're too late." "Not yet," he said, turning his horse sharply. "There's another way in. A narrow path along the ridge. It'll be dangerous," she followed without hesitation. The trail was steep, the rocks loose underfoot. Below them, the canyon stretched deep and wide, filled with thornbush and dust. They could see figures moving near the base 3 riders. One with a rifle slung across his back. The Apache motioned for silence. They dismounted, leading the horses along the ridge until they reached a small outcrop that overlooked the camp. From there she saw the truth of it. The sheriff's men had found the witness. He was bound against a rock, barely conscious, a thin figure dressed in torn clothing. The sheriff himself stood nearby, speaking to the young deputy who had visited her house. Her heart hammered as she watched them. The Apache's jaw clenched, his eyes hard. "If they kill him," he said quietly, "everything ends here." "What can we do?" She whispered. "I'll go down," he said. "You stay with the horses." "If I'm not back, no," she said sharply. "You can't face them alone." He looked at her then, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. "You said you believed me," he said. "Then believe I know what I'm doing." Before she could argue, he was already moving, slipping through the rocks with the silence of someone born to the land. She watched him go, her heart tightening with each step he took. From where she hid, she could see the sheriff pacing, shouting orders. The sound of his voice carried up through the canyon. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky a deep orange. The air grew thick with dust. She waited, every second, stretching too long. Then a gunshot cracked through the air, followed by another. She grabbed her rifle and ran toward the edge. Below, chaos had erupted. The Apache had reached the camp, moving fast and precise, but the sheriff's men were firing from behind the rocks. The witness lay motionless on the ground, blood staining the dust near his feet. Her pulse roared in her ears. She wanted to scream for them to stop, but her voice wouldn't come. She could see the sheriff raising his gun, aiming toward the Apache. Instinct took over. She lifted her rifle, steadied her breath, and fired. The bullet struck the sheriff's hat, knocking it clean off his head. He stumbled, turning his gaze upward, eyes blazing with recognition. "The widow," he shouted. "She's with him." The words rang through the canyon like thunder. The Apache turned, motioning for her to move, but it was too late. The sheriff's men began climbing toward the ridge, shouting to one another. She fired again, the sound echoing through the rocks. The Apache reached the wounded man, cutting his bonds, then lifted him onto his shoulder. He moved quickly toward the far end of the canyon, ducking behind boulders as bullets struck the dirt around him. She ran back to the horses, her heart pounding, fear clawing at her throat. In the distance, she heard the sheriff cursing, his voice growing closer. She mounted her horse, gripping the reins tightly. When the Apache appeared, the wounded man slumped over his saddle. She didn't wait for words. Together they rode hard, the sound of gunfire chasing them across the land. The sky had turned dark by the time they reached the outer ridge. The horses were exhausted, their sides slick with sweat. The woman looked back and saw lights flickering behind them, lanterns. "Moving fast. They're following," she said breathlessly. He nodded. "They won't stop now. Then where do we go?" He looked toward the north, where the land rose into dark shapes. "There's an old cave ahead. My people used it once when the soldiers came. We'll make our stand there." She didn't like the sound of those words, but there was no other choice. They rode until the moon rose, a pale light spilling across the rocks. At last they reached the entrance of the cave, a jagged opening hidden by brush. Inside, the air was cool and still. The Apache laid the wounded man on the ground, checking his pulse. "He's alive," he said, relief in his voice. She knelt beside him, lighting a small lantern. "Can he talk?" "Not yet," he said, "but he will." Outside, the wind carried the distant echo of voices, the sheriff's men closing in. The woman gripped her rifle tighter, the fear inside her giving way to something else's determination. She looked at the Apache, his face lit faintly by the firelight. "They'll be here soon," she said. He nodded, eyes fixed on the mouth of the cave. "Then we hold until dawn." And as the sound of horses thundered closer through the valley, both knew the coming hours would decide everything, the truth, the lies, and the fragile line between mercy and survival. The night inside the cave was long and heavy with silence. The woman sat near the small fire, listening to the wind whistling through the rocks. Each sound outside made her tighten her grip on the rifle. The Apache sat close to the entrance, motionless, except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. The wounded man stirred now and then, breathing unevenly. His face was pale, but his eyes flickered open once before slipping back into unconsciousness. They had done all they could. The rest would depend on the morning. The woman's mind drifted to her son, sleeping safe in town. She pictured his small hands folded under his cheek, unaware of how close danger had come to tearing their world apart. That thought steadied her. She looked toward the Apache, whose face was half lit by the fire. His expression was calm, though the tension in his shoulders told a different story. "They'll come before sunrise," she said quietly. He nodded. "Yes, but they won't find us easy." She looked toward the narrow path outside, the one they had taken to reach the cave. It was steep and rocky. One wrong step could send a man tumbling down. "You could still go," she said softly. "Take him and disappear into the hills. They'll only look for me." He turned toward her then, his dark eyes steady. "You think I'd leave you after all this?" He paused for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "You believed me when no one else would. I won't forget that." The fire popped softly, sending a spark up into the cold air. She wanted to answer, but something in her throat stopped her. Instead, she nodded and turned her gaze back to the shadows dancing along the cave walls. Hours passed slowly. The stars outside dimmed, and the faint light of dawn began to push through the cracks of the cave. The Apache stood and walked to the entrance, his steps silent. He crouched low, peering out across the valley. "They're here," he said quietly. She joined him, her heart thudding hard against her ribs. Down below, She could see riders moving in single-file lanterns, swinging like fireflies in the gray morning light. The sheriff led them, his wide hat pulled low, his rifle resting across the saddle. "They'll try to come from both sides," the Apache said. "We'll need to hold them long enough for the witness to tell his story." The wounded man stirred again, opening his eyes. His voice was weak but clear. "I can talk now," he whispered. "They killed the wrong ones. It was never him or his people. It was the soldiers. They wanted the land near the river. They said it was for the settlers, but they just wanted the gold in the riverbed." The woman's stomach twisted. She had heard the rumors, but to hear it spoken by someone who had seen it was different. "If you tell the sheriff that, he'll have no choice but to stop this," she said. The man gave a faint, sad smile. "The sheriff already knows," he whispered. "He was part of it." The words hit like a stone thrown into still water. The Apache's jaw clenched. He reached for his rifle. "Then there's no talking left." Before the woman could speak, the first shot cracked through the air, echoing off the canyon walls. Dust rose near the cave entrance, and a bullet struck the rock inches from her shoulder. She ducked instinctively, pulling the wounded man back behind cover. The Apache moved like lightning, returning fire with sharp precision. The fight that followed was fierce and fast. The sheriff's men tried climbing the ridge, but the rocks and narrow trails slowed them. The Apache's shots rang true, each one forcing them lower. The woman fired twice, keeping them pinned while the Apache reloaded. The wounded man tried to rise, clutching his side. "I can't let them win," he said through gritted teeth. "I'll tell everyone. The truth will come out. You'll have your chance," she said, steadying him. Moments later, the gunfire stopped. The sheriff called out, his voice echoing cold and clear. "You can't hide forever, widow. Come down, and I'll let the boy go free." Her heart froze. "He doesn't have my son," she whispered, but doubt crept in like a shadow. The Apache's face hardened. "He's lying. They'll say anything to draw you out." Still her mind spun with worry. What if Hanley had betrayed her? What if the sheriff had found out where her boy was hiding? The thought nearly broke her resolve. The Apache saw it in her eyes. "You stay," he said firmly. "If they get past me, you take him and run. Promise me." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." He gave a faint, tired smile. "You said that before. But this time, you might have to." Before she could answer, more shots rang out. One bullet grazed the Apache's arm, tearing through his sleeve. He didn't flinch. He fired back, his movement sure and deliberate. The sheriff's men began to fall back, shouting orders to regroup. Then came a sound that silenced everything, the sharp whistle of reinforcements approaching from the west. A group of riders appeared, but they carried no sheriff's badges. Their horses bore the marks of the territorial army. Leading them was a gray-haired officer, one she recognized instantly, Colonel Danner, the same man who had promised her protection months ago. The Apache's eyes narrowed. "He's the one who started all this." The colonel raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Lay down your weapons," he called. "No more bloodshed. The truth is known now." The woman froze, unsure if it was another trick. "How do we know?" she called back. Danner dismounted, lifting a paper sealed with the governor's mark. "We found the records," he said. "Orders signed under the sheriff's name. The attack on the river settlement was meant to drive the tribes out. They wanted the claim rights. The territory office sent me to put an end to it." The sheriff shouted in protest, but his own men began to back away. The Apache lowered his rifle slowly, never taking his eyes off Danner. The colonel approached the cave carefully. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but the man you protected will live. He'll testify." The woman felt her knees weaken with relief. She looked at the Apache, whose expression stayed unreadable. "It's over," she said softly. He shook his head. "Not over. Just finished." The sheriff was taken into custody, his protests fading into the distance as the soldiers led him away. The sun had risen fully now, spreading gold light across the valley. The wind carried the scent of dust and sage, but beneath it was something cleaner peace. Fragile and new, the wounded man was taken down the ridge for treatment, escorted by 2 soldiers. The woman stood beside the Apache, watching the last of the sheriff's men disappear beyond the hills. "You could stay," she said after a long pause. "There's land north of town. No one would bother you there." He looked toward the horizon where the land met the sky. "My place isn't here," he said softly. "My people are gone, but the land remembers. I'll go where their voices still live." She wanted to say something more, to thank him or beg him not to leave, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded, her throat tight. "If you ever come back," she said, "there'll be a fire waiting." He looked at her for a long moment, then mounted his horse. The light caught his face, showing both weariness and peace. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "Don't forget that." He rode away without another word, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. She stood there until he was gone, till the only sound left was the wind and the soft creak of the saddle left behind. When she returned to town days later, her son ran to her, his small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. She knelt and held him close, breathing in the scent of home. Hanley met her outside the store, his eyes filled with quiet relief. "Heard what happened?" he said, words spreading fast. "Folks say you stood up to the sheriff himself." She smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." Over the following weeks, the story spread across the valley. The widow who rode with an Apache. The truth that ended the lies of powerful men. Some whispered that the Apache still rode the northern hills, watching over the land in silence. Others said he was gone for good, but at night. When the wind moved through the dry grass and the stars shone bright over the plains, she sometimes thought she heard a distant voice carried in the air, and in that sound she found comfort not in the ending, but in knowing that courage and truth could still survive in a world made of dust and loss. She tended her land again, raised her son, and built a life from what remained. Yet every dawn when the sun broke over the hills, she would look toward the north, where the light touched the farthest ridges, and remember the man who had come to her door with a heart full of sorrow and a purpose stronger than revenge. The world had changed, but the land endured. And somewhere out there, so did High a reminder that even in the harshest times, love and justice could find their way through the dark. T.